So, let me get this straight, Hank said, staring at my very rough sketch of the proposed bell tower. You want a bell tower in your backyard, a big one, and you want it to look old? Ancient, I corrected, but also wrong. Like, historically confused. Think medieval castle meets Roman temple meets, I don't know, a touch of Dr. Seuss? Hank chuckled. Dr. Seuss? Okay, I'm intrigued. And what's this about a carry-on? Carillon, I said. It's a musical instrument, a set of tuned bells played with a keyboard. I want to be able to play music. Loud music. Hank's eyes lit up. You're serious? Dead serious, I said. I have a neighbor. Let's just say we have differing opinions on the appropriate level of sound in the neighborhood. Hank grinned. Say no more, I'm in. This sounds like the most fun I've had in years, but it's gonna be expensive. I don't care about expensive. This was more important. It was a perfect Saturday afternoon. Sun shining, birds singing, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves. I was in my backyard, sprawled in a hammock, a cold drink in hand, and the sweet sounds of some classic rock drifting from my outdoor speakers. Not blasting, mind you. Just present. A pleasant backdrop to a perfectly pleasant day. Then he showed up. A nervous-looking man in a polo shirt clutching a clipboard, the official logo of the Harmony Heights HOA, emblazoned on his chest like a scarlet letter. He cleared his throat, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Mr. Miller? He asked, hesitantly. That's me, I said, sitting up in the hammock, a sense of foreboding creeping over me. Something I can help you with? He swallowed hard. I'm, from the Homeowners Association. We've received a complaint? A complaint. In Harmony Heights, that was practically a declaration of war. I, Leo Miller, music enthusiast, backyard relaxer, and generally laid-back dude, with a mischievous streak, I admit, was apparently the subject of an HOA complaint about my music. We are giving you a warning. Further action may be required, he said, extending the clipboard. My speakers, by the way, are nothing special. Just a pair of high-quality, weatherproof speakers mounted discreetly on the back of my house. I use them responsibly. No all-night raves, no death metal at dawn, just some background music while I'm gardening or grilling. Apparently, even that was too much for someone in Harmony Heights. To understand the full absurdity of this situation, you need to understand Karen. I'd had a few run-ins with her before, minor skirmishes in the ongoing war of suburban existence. She'd complained about my perfectly legal vegetable garden, claiming it was unsightly. She'd reported my tastefully decorated mailbox for being too whimsical. She'd even left an anonymous note on my door, complaining about the color of my wind chimes. They were copper, for crying out loud. Karen, it seemed, had a problem with anything that deviated even slightly from her narrow definition of acceptable. The HOA representative, whose name I later learned was Kevin, and who seemed genuinely embarrassed by the whole situation, explained the complaint. Excessive noise, he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. Disruption of the peace. Disturbance of the tranquility of the neighborhood. Tranquility? I repeated, incredulous. It was the Rolling Stones, Kevin, not a death metal band. Kevin sighed. I know, Mr. Miller, I know, but, well, you know how it is. I did know how it was. It was Karen. It had to be. No one else in Harmony Heights cared about a little classic rock on a Saturday afternoon. This was a personal vendetta, disguised as a community concern. My initial reaction was confusion. What was so offensive about a little music? Then came the annoyance. This was ridiculous. I was being reasonable. I wasn't blasting music at 3 a.m. I was enjoying a sunny afternoon in my own backyard. And then finally a spark of defiance. They wanted to take away my music? Fine. We'd see about that. The HOA meeting was, as expected, a masterclass in passive aggression and bureaucratic nonsense. It was held in the Harmony Heights Community Center, a room that seemed to have been designed to suck the joy out of any gathering. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige everything. The board members, a collection of mostly apathetic retirees, sat behind a long table, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Except for her, Karen. She sat at the end of the table, her spine ramrod straight, her expression a mixture of disapproval and righteous indignation. She was dressed in what I could only describe as aggressively casual attire. A Live, Laugh, Love t-shirt, the irony, floral capri pants, and a pair of white sneakers that looked like they'd never seen a speck of dirt. She was the picture of suburban conformity, a woman on a mission to eradicate any trace of individuality or, God forbid, fun from Harmony Heights. "Mr. Miller," Karen began, her voice sharp and accusatory, "your music has been a source of considerable distress to your neighbors." "My music?" I replied, keeping my voice calm. "I play music at a reasonable volume, Karen, during reasonable hours. I'm not exactly hosting a rock concert here." "Reasonable?" Karen scoffed. "It's inconsiderate, Mr. Miller. It's disrespectful. It's disturbing the tranquility of our neighborhood." She practically vibrated with indignation. "I play it in my backyard," I say, keeping my volume low. "I can hear it clear as day inside my house. It's rattling the windows," she said with wild eyes. One of the board members, a sleepy-looking man in a golf shirt, mumbled something about noise ordinances. "There are no noise ordinances being violated, sir," I said, addressing the board member directly. "I've checked, and frankly, Karen's exaggerations are, well, they're exaggerations." "Exaggerations!" Karen shrieked. "I have evidence, recordings, witnesses." "Witnesses to what?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Me enjoying a sunny afternoon? Listening to some classic rock? Minding my own business?" "It's disruptive, Mr. Miller," Karen insisted. It's unneighborly." The meeting devolved from there. Karen continued her tirade, her accusations growing increasingly absurd. At one point, she claimed my music was causing structural damage to her house. I continued to defend myself, pointing out the lack of specific rules against outdoor speakers, the reasonable volume, and the limited hours of use. The other board members mostly just sat there, looking uncomfortable and wishing they were somewhere else. Except for one, a younger woman with a faint smile playing on her lips. I suspected she might be a secret rebel. In the end, a compromise was reached. A ridiculous, infuriating compromise. I was allowed to use my outdoor speakers for 1 hour per week, on Saturdays, between the hours of 2 p.m. and 3 p.m., and at a volume level that was barely audible. It was, essentially, a ban. Karen had won, but as I walked out of that meeting, my frustration simmering, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The sound of silence might be what Karen wanted, but it wasn't what she was going to get. I tried. I really did. I attempted to comply with the HOA's ludicrous new restrictions on my outdoor speaker usage, 1 hour per week on Saturdays, between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m., at a volume level that was barely above a whisper. It was pathetic. I felt like I was living in a musical prison, my love of sound stifled by Karen's tyrannical obsession with silence. I'd sit in my backyard during my designated music hour, staring at my speakers with a mixture of resentment and despair. The music, once a source of joy and relaxation, had become a symbol of oppression. It was torture. Pure, unadulterated, HOA-approved torture. My frustration grew with each passing, silent Saturday. This wasn't just about the music anymore. It was about control. It was about Karen's relentless pursuit of, well, I wasn't entirely sure what she was pursuing, but it definitely involved making my life miserable. I felt like she was winning. Every silent minute was a victory for her, a defeat for me, and I couldn't stand it. Silence wasn't golden. Silence was surrender. Silence was what Karen wanted. And that, I decided, was simply unacceptable. Something had to be done. Something drastic. My weapon of choice, as always, was the HOA bylaws. That ridiculously long, incredibly boring, and utterly infuriating document held the key to my salvation. I knew it. I just had to find it. I spent hours poring over the pages, scanning through clauses about fence heights, landscaping restrictions, and acceptable paint colors. I was looking for something. Anything I could use to fight back. I wasn't just looking for a way to play music. I was looking for a way to make a statement. A grand, glorious, ridiculously loud statement. And then I found it. It wasn't in the section on noise regulations, as I'd expected. It was tucked away in a completely different section, under Approved Structures and Architectural Elements. There was the usual blather about maintaining the harmonious aesthetic of Harmony Heights, but then a loophole. A glorious, beautiful, wonderfully ambiguous loophole. There were restrictions on modern sound systems, clearly targeting my speakers, but there were no restrictions on bells or bell towers. In fact, there was a vague, almost throwaway line about how structures that enhance the community's aesthetic character, particularly those with historical significance, are encouraged. Historical significance, I muttered, a slow smile spreading across my face. Enhance the community's aesthetic character. Oh, I'd enhance it, all right. I'd enhance it with something so historically inaccurate, so aesthetically challenging, that it would make Karen's head explode. The idea was starting to form. A beautiful, ridiculous, bell-shaped idea. The plan was simple in its audacity. I would build a bell tower. Not just a little bell tower, mind you, a massive bell tower, a towering monument to sonic defiance. It would be, of course, historically inaccurate. A mishmash of styles, a Frankensteinian creation of architectural anachronisms. I'd draw inspiration from medieval castles, Romanesque churches, and maybe even a little bit of Dr. Seuss. It would be oversized, out of place, and utterly, gloriously absurd. The perfect visual representation of my contempt for Karen and her ridiculous rules. And the best part? It would house a carillon. Not just a single bell, but a full-fledged carillon. A set of tuned bells, played with a keyboard, capable of producing a wide range of very loud music. I'd be able to play anything I wanted, at any volume I wanted, within reasonable limits, of course, mostly, and Karen couldn't do a thing about it. Because bells, apparently, were not modern sound systems. Bells were historical architectural elements. Bells were OA approved. I could already picture Karen's face, her tightly wound expression contorting with rage and disbelief as the sound of bells, my bells, echoed through Harmony Heights. It was a beautiful image, a symphony of sweet, sweet revenge. I knew it was ridiculous. I knew it was over the top. I knew it was probably going to cost me a small fortune, but I didn't care. I was committed. Operation Bell Tower was a go. And Karen Whitmore was about to learn that sometimes the best way to fight silence is with a whole lot of noise. This was going to be fun. My first step, naturally, was to find someone crazy enough to build my vision. I needed a contractor, an architect, a master builder of historically inaccurate bell towers. I found him in the form of a man named Hank, who ran a small construction company specializing in unique and unusual projects. So, let me get this straight, Hank said, staring at my very rough sketch of the proposed bell tower. You want a bell tower in your backyard, a big one. And you want it to look old? Ancient, I corrected, but also wrong. Like historically confused. Think medieval castle meets Roman temple meets, I don't know, a touch of Dr. Seuss. Hank chuckled. Dr. Seuss? Okay, I'm intrigued. And what's this about a carry-on? Carillon, I said. It's a musical instrument, a set of tuned bells played with a keyboard. I want to be able to play music, loud music. Hank's eyes lit up. You're serious? Dead serious, I said. I have a neighbor. Let's just say we have differing opinions on the appropriate level of sound in the neighborhood. Hank grinned. Say no more. I'm in. This sounds like the most fun I've had in years. But it's gonna be expensive. I don't care about expensive. This was more important. We discussed the details. The tower would be approximately 30 feet tall, the maximum height allowed without requiring a special permit, which I'd already checked, of course. It would be built from a mismatched assortment of materials: stone, brick, reclaimed wood, maybe even some faux medieval gargoyles, if I could find them. It would be deliberately oversized, out of proportion with my house, and utterly, gloriously out of place in the otherwise uniform landscape of Harmony Heights. The Carillon itself would be a top-of-the-line model, with at least 23 bells, capable of playing everything from Bach to the Beatles. The construction process was, as expected, a spectacle. Trucks arrived, delivering tons of stone, brick, and lumber. A crane hoisted the massive Carillon bells into place. Workers swarmed over my backyard, hammering, sawing, and generally creating a cacophony of construction noise. The neighbors, of course, were captivated. They gathered on their lawns, watching the tower rise day by day, their expressions a mixture of confusion, amusement, and growing concern. "What is he building?" I heard one whisper. "It looks like a church tower," another said. "Is that allowed?" a third asked nervously. Fluffybutt, my neighbor's chihuahua, seemed particularly fascinated by the construction, barking incessantly at the workers and attempting to supervise their progress. My internal monologue was a constant stream of giddy anticipation. With each stone that was laid, with each brick that was mortared, with each bell that was hoisted into place, my vision was becoming a reality. My tower of tranquility, the irony was delicious, was taking shape. And I couldn't wait to unleash its sonic fury upon Karen and the HOA. There was one minor setback. A brief visit from a rather flustered HOA representative. Not Karen, thankfully. She was probably still recovering from the shock of the building permit I'd obtained. "Mr. Miller?" he stammered, looking up at the partially constructed tower. "We've received some concerns about this structure." "Concerns?" I repeated, feigning innocence. "What kind of concerns?" "Well," he said, nervously adjusting his tie, "it's rather large and unusual." "It's a bell tower," I said with a shrug. "A historical architectural element. Perfectly compliant with the bylaws, I assure you." I handed him a copy of the relevant clause, highlighted for his convenience. He scanned the document, his face paling slightly. "But the bells? What about them?" I asked. "They're part of the structure. They're integral to its historical significance." He looked at the tower, then back at the bylaws, then back at me. He clearly had no idea what to do. He mumbled something about further review and retreated, looking defeated. And so the construction continued. And finally, after weeks of noise, dust, and bewildered stares from the neighbors, it was complete. My bell tower stood tall and proud, a monument to my defiance, a beacon of sonic rebellion, a completely ridiculous addition to the Harmony Heights landscape. I waited until precisely 7 p.m. I wanted to make sure Karen was home. I wanted to make sure she was listening. I sat down at the Carillon keyboard, took a deep breath, and began to play. Not a delicate classical piece. Oh no. I launched into a full-throated, slightly off-key rendition of the William Tell Overture. The sound of the bells, amplified by the tower's acoustics, was magnificent. It was loud. It was clear. It was impossible to ignore. It echoed through Harmony Heights, a triumphant, slightly unhinged declaration of war. I played for a full 5 minutes, letting the music wash over the neighborhood, imagining Karen's reaction, picturing her face contorting with rage and frustration. And then I stopped. The silence that followed was almost deafening. And then I heard it, a distant, high-pitched scream, followed by the unmistakable sound of a door slamming. I smiled. Operation Bell Tower was officially a success. The games had begun. Karen's counterattack was, predictably, swift and furious. She stormed over to my house the very next morning, her face a mask of outrage, her Live Laugh Love shirt practically vibrating with indignation. "What?" she shrieked, her voice echoing through the still relatively peaceful morning air. "Is the meaning of this?" She pointed a trembling finger at the bell tower, as if it were some kind of alien spacecraft that had landed in my backyard. I emerged from the house, a mug of coffee in hand, a picture of calm serenity. "Good morning, Karen," I said, my voice smooth and even. "You're referring, I presume, to my new architectural addition?" "It's a monstrosity!" she sputtered, her eyes bulging. "It's a giant thing. And the noise, it's unbearable." "It's a bell tower, Karen," I corrected, with a perfectly straight face. "A historical architectural element, to be precise. Perfectly compliant with the HOA bylaws, I might add. Remember that clause about enhancing the community's aesthetic character?" "Enhancing?" she repeated, her voice reaching a pitch that only dogs, and possibly bats, could hear. "It's destroying the community's aesthetic character. It's hideous." "I call it the Tower of Tranquility," I said with a shrug. "Although I admit that tranquility is somewhat intermittent." "You built this thing just to annoy me," she accused, her voice shaking with rage. "I built it to enhance my property, Karen," I said, my voice dripping with mock innocence, "and to explore my passion for historical bell-ringing." "Bell-ringing?" she sputtered. You're ringing those bells on purpose." "Of course," I said. "That's how bells work. You ring them." I gestured towards the Carillon keyboard, now housed within a small, weatherproof enclosure at the base of the tower. "Would you like to hear a demonstration?" Before Karen could answer, or more likely, scream, I stepped inside the enclosure and launched into a spirited and deliberately off-key rendition of Pop Goes the Weasel. The sound of the Carillon, amplified by the tower's acoustics, was impressive. It was also, I admit, incredibly annoying. Karen clapped her hands over her ears, her face contorted in a grimace of pain and fury. "Stop it!" she yelled. "Stop that infernal racket!" I finished the tune with a flourish, then stepped back outside, a smug smile on my face. "As I said, Karen, cultural enrichment." I'll shut this down," she vowed, her voice hoarse. "I'll have this tower demolished, you'll see." She turned and stomped off, her Live, Laugh, Love shirt looking distinctly unlive, unlaugh, and unlovelike. The emergency HOA meeting, part 2 because apparently we needed another one, was, if possible, even more ridiculous than the first. Karen, looking like she'd aged 20 years in the past few weeks, presented her case with the fervor of a religious zealot. This bell tower," she declared, her voice shaking with emotion, is a threat to our community. It's a noise polluter. It's an aesthetic abomination. It's a symbol of anarchy." She went on to cite noise complaints, which I'd cleverly anticipated by keeping the bell ringing within the city's noise ordinance limits, aesthetic concerns, which were entirely subjective, and even potential structural damage to neighboring houses, which was, of course, complete nonsense. She even brought in a sound expert, a guy who looked suspiciously like her nephew, who testified that the bell tower was creating a sonic disturbance of unprecedented proportions. Then it was my turn. "Mr. Power," I began, addressing the board with a calm, reasonable demeanor that was entirely fake. "Seems to be under the impression that I've erected this bell tower solely to annoy her. While I admit that is a delightful side effect, my primary motivation was to enhance my property and contribute to the cultural enrichment of Harmony Heights." I then proceeded to present my defense. I cited the bylaws again. I presented historical precedents for bell towers, showing pictures of famous bell towers from around the world, conveniently omitting the fact that those towers were usually attached to churches or cathedrals, not suburban homes. I even argued that the bells were a community amenity, offering to play requests from the neighbors, a suggestion that was met with a mixture of horror and amusement. And, just for good measure, I'd brought along my own expert, a local music teacher, Mrs. Gable, a surprisingly enthusiastic supporter of my bell tower, who testified about the musicality of the carillon and the historical significance of bell ringing. "Bells," Mrs. Gable declared, with a dramatic flourish, "have been used for centuries to mark important events, to call people to worship, and to make a joyful noise." The board members were, to put it mildly, divided. Some were clearly still under Karen's sway, nodding along to her every rant. Others looked confused, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information and noise. And a few, I suspected, were starting to see the humor in the situation. One board member, a quiet, unassuming man named Mr. Henderson, even whispered to me during a break, "You know, I actually kind of like the bells. They remind me of my childhood in Europe." The meeting ended, as before, in a stalemate. Karen's motion to ban the bell tower was defeated, but she was clearly not giving up. She left the meeting, her face a mask of fury, vowing to continue her fight. And so began the Bell Tower War, a period of escalating absurdity that would go down in Harmony Heights history. Karen, obsessed with silencing my bells, tried every tactic she could think of. She filed noise complaints with the city. The city sent inspectors. The inspectors measured the sound levels. The sound levels were within legal limits. Case closed. She tried to organize a neighborhood petition to ban the bell tower. She went door to door, armed with her clipboard and her Live, Laugh, Love shirt, trying to convince people that my bells were a threat to their peace and quiet. The petition failed miserably. Most people either politely declined to sign or slammed the door in her face. She even, I suspect, attempted some minor sabotage. I found a few scratches on the tower's stonework, easily repaired, and a suspicious-looking pile of birdseed near the base of the tower. Apparently, she was hoping to attract a flock of bell-pecking pigeons. Of course, I had security cameras everywhere, capturing her every move, and I, of course, retaliated. Not with vandalism. Oh no, I was above that. I retaliated with music. I started playing wake-up calls at dawn. Not every day, of course, just occasionally. A little Ride of the Valkyries at 6 a.m., or perhaps a rousing rendition of the 1812 Overture, just to, start the day off with a little culture. I hosted bell concerts for the neighborhood, inviting people to bring lawn chairs and blankets and enjoy an evening of carillon music. I played everything from classical pieces to popular songs, even taking requests, except from Karen, of course. And then there was Karen's Lament, a custom tune I composed myself, a mournful, slightly off-key melody that I played whenever I saw her approaching my house. It was subtle, but effective. I even started experimenting with different musical styles. One day I programmed the carillon to play a medley of polka tunes. Another day it was disco. I even tried a little heavy metal, just to see what would happen. The HOA nearly had a collective aneurysm. It was a glorious, ridiculous sonic war. Karen, increasingly desperate, tried everything she could think of to silence me. She yelled, she screamed, she threatened, she pleaded, but nothing worked. My bell tower stood tall, my carillon rang out, and I, Leo Miller, the accidental bell ringer, reigned supreme. The sound of the bells had become the soundtrack of my victory, a constant, triumphant reminder that sometimes the best way to fight back against absurdity is with even greater absurdity.